Today's project is how to make this happy little bumblebee. I'm going to place him here and show you what you'll need. You'll need your crochet hook. Today I'm going to be using my 2.5mm clover hook. You'll also need a stitch marker, some pins and some safety eyes, a yarn needle in order for us to be able to sew our work together, a pair of scissors, some polyester toy stuffing, and then some black, yellow, white, and a little bit of pink yarn. This will be our colour palette. We'll begin with making the body of our bee. Grab your yellow yarn and make a slip knot. Attach the slip knot to your hook, and we're going to then chain 2 stitches. In the second chain from your hook, we're going to place 6 single crochets. Just as a quick side note, you may notice that I'm yarning under for this project, but don't worry, if you prefer yarning over, please go ahead and do it that way. Place your stitch marker in the last stitch that you created so that we know where the end of the round is. If there's a hole forming in the centre of your work, give your yarn end a little tug to close it. Let's move on to round 2. For round 2, we're going to place an increase into each of the 6 stitches of round 1. By that, I mean we're going to place 2 single crochets into each stitch. At the end of round 2, you will have 12 stitches in total. Let's meet back once you've completed this round. Replace your stitch marker, and if needed, give your yarn end a little tug to close the hole in the centre. We can now move on to round 3. For round 3, we're going to do a single crochet followed by an increase, and we'll do that for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 3, you will have 18 stitches in total. Perfect, that's us finished round 3. We can now move on to round 4. For round 4, we're going to continue increasing, and to do that, we'll place a single crochet into the next 2 stitches, followed by an increase into the 3rd stitch, and we'll follow that pattern all of the way around. At the end of round 4, you'll have 24 stitches. Now for round 5. This is the last of our increasing rounds. For round 5, we're going to do 3 single crochets followed by an increase. And again, you'll do that for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 5, you'll have 30 stitches in total. Now that the increasing rounds are complete, we can now move on to rounds 6, 7 and 8. For those 3 rounds, we're just going to do single crochets all the way around. Let's meet back before you do the very last stitch of round 8, as we're going to perform a colour change at that point, and I'd like to talk you through how to best do a colour change. Awesome, we've got one more stitch to do for round 8, and at this point we're going to perform a colour change. Push your hook through the final stitch and grab your yarn and pull it through. You'll have 2 loops on your hook. Grab your black yarn and place it over your hook, and pull it through the 2 yellow loops. This is how we perform a colour change. Grab your stitch marker again and mark the very last stitch that we created. We're going to continue the next 3 rounds, so rounds 9, 10 and 11, in the black yarn. For all 3 rounds, we're just going to be doing single crochets. Place your hook through the very first stitch of the next round, and grab your yarn end and place it on top of your hook. Now grab your working yarn and create the stitch as you would as normal. This allows us to secure the loose end rather than grabbing our sewing needle and having to weave it into place. You only need to do this for a couple of stitches when you introduce a new colour, and then you can continue to crochet as normal. Let's meet back before you finish the very last stitch of round 11, as we're going to perform another colour change at that point. Now we have one more stitch left for round 11, and we're going to perform the colour change back to yellow. So once again, we're going to place our hook through the final stitch of the round and grab the black yarn and pull it through until you've got 2 loops on your hook. Pick up your yellow yarn and place it over your hook. Pull the yellow yarn through both of the loops that are on your hook. Perfect, we've now created the colour change. Grab your stitch marker and place it in the last stitch you created, which would be in the black yarn. Let's do the first 2 or 3 single crochets of round 12 and then stop for a moment. And during our crochet break, I will show you how to add the eyes, mouth and rosy cheeks of our happy little bumblebee. So let's stop here and secure our work so that it doesn't unravel, and we'll add the face details. You can already start to see our bee is taking shape. So it's the perfect time to stop and create the face. Let's start with adding the eyes to our happy little bumblebee. You'll need 2 safety eyes as well as 2 washers in order to secure the safety eyes in place. You'll see the safety eyes have a curve on one side and are flat on the other. This will become important when we use them to secure the eyes. We want to place the eyes between rounds 3 and 4. And you want the colour change to be at the bottom of the bee, therefore the eye placement is at the top half of the bee face. Go ahead and insert both of the eyes. I usually have a 3 or 4 stitch gap between each of them. Once you're happy with your placement, I usually turn my work inside out, as it's easier to attach the washers when I can see what I'm doing. Grab your first washer. If you'll remember, there's a curved side and a flat side. You want the flat side to be facing the yarn when you attach it to the safety eye. Grab your work and place on the washer and push it down until you hear it click. You want to lock it in place. Grab your second washer and do exactly the same. Again, you want the flat side to be facing the yarn. Lock it into place, and there we are. We've secured our safety eyes. We can turn our work the right way around again. And next we will add the smile to our happy little bumblebee. Grab some thread or yarn and attach it to your yarn needle, as we're going to sew on the mouth. Again, remember that the bottom of the bee is where the colour change is taking place. Therefore the smile is going to be placed between the eyes and the bottom of the bee. And we'll start the smile between rounds 3 and 4, just below the eyes. I push my needle through from the back of the work, and I leave a little bit of a tail behind. We're going to push our needle through the front of the work next, again through rounds 3 and 4, just below the eyes, and we're going to make a straight line. Our poor bee looks very unimpressed just now, but to bring out his smile, we're going to push our needle through rounds 4 and 5, where the centre point of the mouth is. Then feed your yarn needle underneath the straight line stitch that we just created, as this allows us to grab the thread and start shaping the mouth. Push your yarn needle back through the hole you just came out of and make sure that you're securing the smile in place. The final step is to turn your work over and tie a knot with the thread that you've just used to embroider the smile. And make sure that your working yarn isn't accidentally caught up in the knot that you create. Next up, let's add some rosy cheeks. With some pink yarn attached to our yarn needle, we are now ready to add his rosy cheeks. As before, we're going to start our embroidery from the back of our work and push our yarn needle through to the front at rounds 3 and 4. We'll push it back through at rounds 4 and 5, creating a straight line stitch. For the second stitch of our rosy cheek, we're going to go up 1 stitch from the stitch we just created and push our needle through rounds 4 and 5. And as we want to create a V shape, we're going to pass our needle back through the hole between round 3 and 4. Perfect, that's our first rosy cheek in place. We can now move on to the second. And we're doing exactly the same. We're starting with a straight line stitch, which starts between rounds 3 and 4 and ends between rounds 4 and 5. We then go up 1 stitch, pull our yarn through and create a V shape. And we do that by pushing our yarn needle back through the very first stitch we created. Wonderful, he's looking so happy. All we need to do now is tie off the loose ends from the pink yarn, and then we can continue with crocheting. Before we started working on the face, we stopped at the beginning of round 12. So we're going to pick up from there. Reattach your work to your hook, and we're going to just do single crochets all the way around for rounds 12, 13 and 14. I'll meet you back once you've completed all 3 rounds of single crochets, and let's just stop before you do the very last stitch of round 14, as we're going to perform another colour change, and I'll talk you through that again. That's us, we've got one more stitch of round 14 to do, and we're going to perform a colour change. So push your hook through the final stitch of the round and grab your yarn and pull it through until you've got 2 loops on your hook. Grab your black yarn and place it over your hook, and pull the black yarn through both loops on your hook. Perfect, we've now completed the colour change. Replace your stitch marker in the last stitch that you created, so that will be the stitch in the yellow. And we can continue crocheting. For rounds 15, 16 and 17, again, we're just going to do single crochets in all 30 stitches. Let's meet back at the end of round 17, just before you do the final stitch of the round, and we'll do the colour change together again. We have one more stitch of round 17 to go, which means it's colour change time. Push your hook through the final stitch of round 17 and grab your yarn, pull it through and have 2 loops on your hook. Grab your yellow yarn and place it over your hook and pull it through both the loops on your hook. We're going to return our stitch marker to the last stitch we created, and we're going to continue with round 18. Again, round 18 is just single crochets for all 30 stitches of the round. This is the final round that we're doing single crochets for. So let's meet back at the end of this round to continue. With round 18 complete, let's secure our work for a moment and stop, as I think it's a good time for us to grab our polyester stuffing and start stuffing our happy little bumblebee. I like to tear up my polyester stuffing, as I find later on when I'm sewing my pieces together, my needle goes through my work a lot easier, rather than getting snagged in clumps of polyester. We'll still have time to add more toy stuffing later, so just gently stuff it just now, and then we will continue with crocheting. Let's pick back up at round 19. Replace your stitch marker in the last stitch of round 18 and reattach your work to your hook. For round 19, we're going to do 3 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease. And we're going to follow that pattern for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 19, we'll have 24 stitches. I'd like to show you quickly how to do the invisible decrease. Once you've done the 3 single crochets, we can now do this invisible decrease. What we're wanting to do is grab the front loops only of the next 2 stitches. So push your hook through the center of each of the next 2 stitches, grabbing the front loops. Grab your yarn and pull it through the 2 loops, and that will leave you with 2 loops on your hook. And just crochet the stitch as normal. So please continue with round 19 with 3 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease all of the way around until you're left with 24 stitches. Perfect! Now let's begin round 20. Round 20 is our last round of yellow, and for this round we'll do 2 single crochets followed by an invisible decrease. As before, we'll do that pattern for the entirety of the round until we're left with 18 stitches. Meet me back just before you do the final stitch of round 20, and once again I'll talk you through how to do the colour change. As we've reached the final stitch of the round, we're going to perform a colour change in the middle of the decrease. So push your hook through the centre of the next 2 stitches, grabbing the front loops only. Grab your yarn and pull them through the 2 loops. This will leave 2 loops on your hook. Now pick up your black yarn and place it over your hook. Now pull the black yarn through the 2 yellow loops on your hook, and we've performed the colour change. Replace your stitch marker in the last stitch you created. We can now tie off the yellow yarn as we're no longer needing it, so grab your scissors and make a snip. Please allow me 2 seconds while I tidy up my work area. Okay, so we can move on to round 21. For this round, we'll be doing a single crochet followed by an invisible decrease, and we'll follow that pattern for the entirety of the round. At the end of the round, you'll have 12 stitches left. For the first stitch of this round, push your hook through and grab the yellow yarn you've just cut and gently place it on top. Grab your black yarn and continue making the stitch as you would normally. This is just to allow us to secure that yellow yarn, as we don't want to be having to pick up our yarn needle to weave it into place. It's just much easier to crochet it into the work. As we've reached the end of round 21, grab your stitch marker to secure your work. We're going to pause for a moment and pick up our polyester toy stuffing again. This is going to be one of the last opportunities you have to stuff your bee, so make sure that you stuff him well. With your bee well stuffed, we can move on to our final round, round 22. This round is very straightforward. All we're going to do is invisible decreases all of the way around. At the end of this round, you'll be left with 6 stitches. Let's meet back once you finish this round and I'll show you how to finish off your work. With round 22 complete, all that's left is to close up our work. Grab your scissors and cut a length of yarn. We're needing it long enough to be able to sew with. Pull the yarn through the last stitch you created and attach the yarn to your yarn needle. Closing up our work is very straightforward. We're going to be using the 6 stitches left over from round 22. Feed your yarn needle through the front loops of the first 2 stitches, then do the same with stitches 3 and 4, and then one more time with stitches 5 and 6. Pull the yarn tight as this will close up the hole at the back of our work. One more thing to do is to weave in the ends of the yarn, and then we've completed our bumblebee body. He's looking great already, so let's move on to making all the rest of his body parts. Grab your black yarn as we're going to make your bumblebee stinger. Start with making a slip knot and attaching it to your hook. You're wanting to now make 2 chain stitches. In the second chain from the hook, we're going to place 4 single crochets. Place your stitch marker in the very last stitch that you created, and if a hole is forming, give your yarn end a little tug to close, and then we'll move on to round 2. For round 2, we're going to do an increase into each of the 4 stitches of round 1, and by that I mean we're going to do 2 single crochets into each of the 4 stitches. At the end of round 2, you will have 8 stitches in total. Replace your stitch marker and then we'll move on to rounds 3 and 4. For rounds 3 and 4, we're just going to be doing single crochets all of the way around into each of the 8 stitches. Let's meet back at the end of round 4 to close our work. That's the final stitch of our stinger complete. We can now close off our work. Grab your scissors and leave a long length of yarn so that we can sew the stinger onto the bee later on. Pull the yarn all the way through your final stitch in order to secure. Let's make the 2 antennae. For that, we're going to be using our black yarn again. Make a slip knot and attach it to your hook. Now let's make a chain of 5 stitches. Perfect, we now have a chain of 5 on our hook. In the second chain from our hook, we're going to place 2 single crochets. In the 3 remaining chain stitches, we're going to place a single crochet into each of them. And just like that, we have completed an antenna. Grab your scissors and leave a long length of yarn in order for us to be able to sew the antenna onto the body of the bee later on. Rewind back to the beginning of this chapter and make a second antenna. We're now going to make the big wings for our bumblebee. We're going to use the white yarn for this and make a slip knot and attach that to our hook. Now make a chain of 2 stitches. In the second chain from our hook, we're going to place 6 single crochets. Grab your stitch marker and mark the last stitch that you created. If a hole is forming in the center of your work, give your yarn end a little tug to close it. Now let's start round 2. For round 2, we're going to do an increase into each of the 6 stitches of round 1. By that I mean we're going to place 2 single crochets into each of the 6 stitches. At the end of this round, you will have 12 stitches in total. Replace your stitch marker in the last stitch you created. And if needed, give your yarn end a little tug to close the hole in the center. And we'll move on to round 3. For round 3, we're going to do a single crochet followed by an increase. And we'll do that for the entirety of the round. At the end of round 3, you will have 18 stitches. Remember to return your stitch marker and give me a moment whilst I sort out my yarn. Let's now move on to round 4. Round 4 is very straightforward. All we're going to do is single crochets all the way around. In fact, we're going to do that for rounds 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So let's meet back once you get to the end of round 8. Great, that's us finished our 5 rounds of single crochet and we can now move on to round 9. Round 9 is our final round for the wings and all we're going to do is invisible decreases all of the way around. At the end of this round you will have 9 stitches left. And that's us completed our larger wing. You want to leave a long length of yarn for us to be able to sew the wing onto the body later. And pull that yarn all the way through our last stitch in order to secure it. Rewind back to the beginning of this chapter and create a second wing. Let's move on to making the smaller of the 2 wings. Again, we're going to be using our white yarn for that and create a slip knot and attach it to our hook. Make a chain of 2 stitches and similar to last time, in the second chain from the hook, place 6 single crochets. Place your stitch marker in the very last stitch that you created. And if a hole is forming in the center of your work, give your yarn end a little tug to close it, and we'll move on to round 2. For round 2, we're going to be doing a single crochet followed by an increase, and we'll do that all the way around. By the end of round 2, you will have 9 stitches. Continue to work round 2, and we'll meet back at the beginning of round 3 for the next set of instructions. Replace your stitch marker in the last stitch that you created, and if you need to, give your yarn end a little tug to close the hole in the center, and we'll move on to round 3. Round 3, we're just going to do single crochets all of the way around. In fact, we're going to do that for rounds 3, 4 and 5. So continue to do single crochets for the next 3 rounds, and let's meet back at round 6. Round 6 is our final round for the small wings. And what we're going to do here is we're going to do 4 invisible decreases, followed by a single crochet in the very last stitch of this round. At the end of the round, you will be left with 5 stitches. And that's us completed the smaller wing. Leave a long length of yarn for us to be able to sew the wing to the body, and pull the yarn all the way through your final stitch to secure. Rewind back to the beginning of this chapter and create a second wing. We're now ready to sew our bee together. We've got a stinger, 2 small wings, 2 large wings, and 2 antennae. And of course, we've got the body of our happy bumblebee. Let's start with sewing on the stinger. You'll want to thread your yarn needle with the length of yarn you left over for sewing. We're going to turn our bee over and place our stinger right in the center of the black area and pin it in place. Using the last round of the stinger, we want to sew that to the body of the bumblebee. When you get to the last few stitches, take a moment and stuff the stinger with a little polyester stuffing. Let's meet back once you've attached the stinger. We're now going to attach the larger wings. I've already pinned one of them in place and will show you the placement with this other one. You want the wings to be just off center of the eye, and the wing placement will start at the very beginning of the first black stripe and end at the beginning of the second black stripe. Pin both your wings into place and sew them onto your bee body. Once done, let's come back here and I'll show you how to attach the smaller wings. With the larger wings attached, we can now concentrate on the smaller wings. Pick up your smaller wing and look for the last stitch that you created. It's created a point to the wing because we only did a single crochet in that last stitch. We want to place the point directly behind the first larger wing and pin it into place. Go ahead and sew the smaller wings onto your bee body, and then let's meet back and we'll discuss how to attach the antenna. With both sets of wings attached to your happy little bumblebee, we can now attach the antenna. I've already gone ahead and attached the first one. When you pick up your antenna, you'll see that it has a bit of a natural curve to it. We want that curve to be facing out towards the front of the bee. Grab a pin and insert it into the bottom of your antenna, as we're going to use that to secure it into place whilst we sew. We want to place the antenna central to the eye and then 2 rounds in front of the black stripe. Pin it into place, and all we're wanting to do is sew along the bottom, attaching it to our bee. You'll then need to weave in both ends of the yarn that are left exposed. Let's meet back once you've attached both of the antennae. And that's us all done. We've created our happy little bumblebee. I hope you'll make some more to keep him company. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and happy bee making!